Chapter 37. Good news. The realization that Trevor's plan had actually worked settled over me like a strange, slow-burning warmth. After days spent trudging through rain-drenched forests, sleeping in the mud, and barely scraping by on half rations, the simple, almost anticlimactic act of rejoining the caravan felt surreal. At the stopover, the same massive, armored carriages we had last seen rumbling away into the night stood waiting, the faint hum of their enchantments buzzing under the morning sun. Trevor had pulled it off. He and Heinrich had gotten us a ride, and now, miraculously, we were back on the safe route. No more guessing at where the caravan had gone. No more pushing through the wilderness, hoping we weren't being stalked by something unseen. The first thing I did when I got back to my assigned section was check my belongings. I wasn't stupid. I had no illusions that everything would be exactly where I left it. The moment we opened the storage compartment, I could tell things had been rifled through. My bags weren't in the places I had left them, and a few pouches had clearly been unfastened. It wasn't a surprise, but it still sent a small twist of irritation through me. Then, at the bottom of the pile, untouched and gleaming with an almost smug aura, was my hoverboard. I let out a slow breath, running my fingers over its surface. Of all the things, they left this? Hexa hummed in my mind. Likelihood suggests your hoverboard was perceived as useless or valueless due to unfamiliarity. Theft patterns indicate looters primarily seek items they understand. Lucky me, I murmured, dragging it out of the compartment. The moment my fingers wrapped around its edges, some of the tension in my chest eased. This was mine. Something from before. Something that still worked, still existed the way it should. With our things as intact as we could hope for, we settled back into the caravan's routine. The rest of the journey was, thankfully, uneventful. Unlike the first half, which had been a gauntlet of violence, uncertainty, and near starvation, the days that followed felt agonizingly slow. The landscape passed by in rolling forests, scattered villages, and roads that cut through seemingly endless stretches of wilderness. Conversation filled the gaps between boredom. Trevor and Heinrich talked more freely now, perhaps because we had suffered together, perhaps because they had simply grown used to my presence. Trevor, as always, had stories, tales of cities I'd never heard of battles fought in the hall of matchmakings, of raids and mercenary contracts that blurred the line between heroism and simple bloodstained pragmatism. Heinrich, when he spoke, was more restrained. His words were careful, chosen. He spoke of the past only in glimpses, his father's injury, the slow decline of their once prosperous raiding group, the weight of expectation on his shoulders. I listened, absorbing every detail. And then, finally, we saw it. The world capital. At first, it was just a faint shimmer on the horizon. A thin, almost ephemeral blue mist that drifted down from the sky like a waterfall. Then, as we grew closer, it became something else entirely. The Nexus weave. Massive, pulsating threads of mana, stretching from the heavens down into the heart of the city, their presence both ethereal and overwhelmingly real. They reminded me of spiderwebs spun from living light, shifting and twisting in patterns that I couldn't fully comprehend. This was where the mana weave connected our world to the others, to the entire vastness of the Nexus itself. The sight of it sent a shudder through me. Hexa, for once, was silent. The city itself was beyond anything I had imagined. A fortress the size of a mountain range, its walls rising so high they seemed to scrape the sky. Each layer was a testament to both architecture and sheer, overwhelming force. Armed platforms, battlements, reinforced layers of stone and magic, this place had been built to withstand the wrath of gods. And it would need to. The thought of what the gods must send to raid this place made my stomach twist. The sheer amount of power it would take to breach those walls, it was staggering. Even with everything I had seen, everything I had learned, this was on another scale entirely. We weren't even inside yet, and I already felt small. The caravan slowed as we approached the outermost checkpoint. The first gate was a massive structure of interlocking steel and spell-forged stone, manned by dozens of heavily armed guards. Above them, magical constructs, floating, mechanical beings inscribed with glowing runes, hovered, their watchful eyes scanning everything below. Ahead of us, caravans, traders, and travelers alike lined up, slowly making their way through the security process. And that was when the dread set in. I hadn't planned for this. With everything that had happened, with all the chaos that had consumed my life since the capital of Ash, I hadn't even thought about what I would say. What I would do. Population bans. I had no paperwork. No gold to grease palms. Nothing that would let me walk through those gates without question. Hexa's voice chimed in, her tone tight. Probability of forced denial at the gate, 73%. Recommendation, immediate alternative action required. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through increasingly desperate possibilities. Sprint through? No, stupid. I'd be cut down in seconds. Bribe someone? I didn't have the money. Lie? Hope for the best? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Trevor and Heinrich weren't in the queue. They were over near the stables, speaking to a laughing man in charge of the guards' horses. And then, before I could fully think it through, I moved. I darted out of line, weaving through the crowd as quickly as I could without drawing attention. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming that I was making a mistake. I rounded the corner just in time for Trevor's fist to slam into my face. Stars burst in my vision as I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. "Oh, I had a feeling it might just be you, kid," Trevor's voice rang in my ears. I blinked, trying to steady myself. He was standing there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Listen," he said. "Do yourself a favor. Get back in line." I shook my head, forcing my breath to steady. "I can't," I said. "I don't have the paperwork. Or the gold. They won't let me through." Trevor's expression didn't change. "I was hoping," I continued, forcing a grin I didn't feel, "that I could just slip in with you guys." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even Hexa seemed to sigh. The first one to speak wasn't Trevor. It was the stable master, the man who had been guiding them through the process. "If you want in," he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, "you'll have to do the 3 jobs. Same as them." I barely hesitated. "Fine." Trevor sighed, shaking his head. The stable master smirked. "Good," he said. "Meet here, 2 nights from now. First job starts then." I nodded, relief crashing over me. Trevor, however, wasn't done. As I turned, preparing to finally take in the city that loomed before us, his hand clamped onto my shoulder. When I looked up, his expression was the most serious I had ever seen it. "I hope you know what you're doing, kid." And then, just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the towering streets of the world capital. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was alone. I turned, stepping forward, allowing myself to truly take in the city. It was something out of a steampunk fever dream. A chaotic, living machine of industry and magic. Neon lights, alchemical street lamps, and glowing runes lit up the roads. The buildings were brutalist towers of raw stone and steel, their harsh exteriors softened by sweeping curves of golden filigree and shimmering magical inlays. The air hummed with energy, both the tangible pulse of the Nexus weave and the sheer, overwhelming presence of people. And for the first time, since the night of the heist, since Git and Sona, since everything, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. I relaxed. The next 2 days passed in a blur of sights and sensations, each moment layered in the electric hum of the city, a city unlike any I had ever known. Pict was a marvel. A world of human ambition shaped by both magic and industry, a city where towering monoliths of steel and stone stretched impossibly high, bathed in the ever-present glow of the Nexus weave. Its architecture was a chaotic marriage of brute pragmatism and unrestrained artistry, massive Art Deco facades carved with golden filigree and swirling enchantments, streets paved with hexagonal tiles that pulsed faintly with embedded mana, and towering buildings wrapped in glowing runic patterns that shifted and reformed with the flow of arcane energy. The wealth disparities were written into the very bones of the city. Those with money lived in the upper sections of the Great Walls themselves, massive, interconnected districts built into the fortress-like structure, entire artificial landscapes suspended hundreds of feet above the true street level. Up there, the wealthy lived as if the city were just another landscape, their homes flanked by perfectly manicured gardens, grand courtyards, and even artificial rivers that cut through their estates in lazy meanders. Their balconies overlooked the endless sprawl below, gazing down on the ceaseless movement of workers and travelers, as distant from the grime of the lower levels as gods looking down from their heavenly perches. At ground level, the city was alive in a different way. The streets pulsed with the constant motion of people, merchants barking their wares beneath massive steel awnings, airships docking and departing from mid-city platforms, and crowds of workers pouring into underground elevators that ferried them to unknown depths. The very air seemed charged with motion, a living machine of flesh and stone and mana. And I was lost in it. For the first time since my life had spiraled into chaos, I let go of the gnawing anxiety in my gut. I ignored Hex's quiet warnings about preparation, about strategy, about keeping my focus on the 3 jobs. I didn't want to think about survival or risk. I wanted to live. The city streets were a playground, and my hoverboard was the perfect tool to explore it. The mana-infused roads meant I could glide effortlessly over stone bridges, weave through narrow alleys that twisted in on themselves like labyrinths, and even vault up to lower-level rooftops to get a better view of the glowing metropolis. I spent what little coin I had left on food and fleeting joys, exotic spiced meat skewers from a street vendor, a ticket into a grand arcane observatory where the Nexus weave was studied in slow-moving glass spheres, a simple trinket from an old merchant who swore it carried the blessing of some forgotten god. The city at night was another wonder entirely. With the sun gone, the monolines that ran through Pict came to life in full force. The weave stretched across the sky like an aurora, cascading down in shimmering waterfalls of blue and violet light. The great walls themselves became part of the spectacle, their surfaces etched with countless glowing signs and shifting advertisements written in both common script and runic glyphs. High above, airships passed through illuminated gates that hovered mid-air, disappearing into the upper levels of the city where only the wealthiest could tread. For 2 days, I let myself be swept up in it all. I wandered, I laughed, I ate food that I had no business spending coin on, and I pushed every responsibility to the back of my mind. And then, before I knew it, I was back at the stables. Trevor and Heinrich were already waiting when I arrived, dressed in dark, tightly fitted gear with climbing pitons, rope, and harnesses strapped to their bodies. The moment I laid eyes on them, my stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Trevor sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as he glanced at Heinrich, who was grinning like a man who had just won a bet. With a long-suffering sigh, Trevor reached into his pocket and flicked a small coin in Heinrich's direction. "Damn it," he muttered. I blinked, completely lost. What was that?" Trevor just gave me a long, disappointed look. "Kid, I was hoping you'd figure out what we were planning without us having to spell it out." I hesitated. Trevor groaned, rubbing his face like a man experiencing second-hand embarrassment. "But no, of course not. You really are just that stupid." Heinrich, still grinning, held out the coin and gave me a mock salute. "Appreciate it, kid." I scowled. "Okay, what am I missing?" Instead of answering, Trevor tossed me a pair of tinted goggles and a cloth mask. "Put those on. No time to waste." A sinking feeling hit me as I secured the goggles over my face. Whatever I had assumed we were doing, probably stable work, maybe moving supplies, had been wrong. Very, very wrong. The stable master appeared a moment later, accompanied by 3 of his lackeys. Unlike Trevor and Heinrich, these men were silent, serious, and built like they had spent their entire lives surviving on the fringes of society. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their gear already strapped and ready. I swallowed hard, trying to play it cool as I followed them deeper into the city. We moved through twisting alleys, past dimly lit corridors, and finally emerged onto a high platform that overlooked the pulsing expanse of the Nexus weave. And then I saw where we were going. My breath caught in my throat. We were scaling the weave itself. It wasn't just energy, it was structure. The massive strands of mana that connected this world to the Nexus were solid, or at least solid enough that they could be climbed, mined, and harvested. And that was exactly what we were about to do. The moment my hands touched the first anchor, Hex's voice chimed in, a sharp reprimand cutting through my mind. "Your academy lectures covered this topic, but as usual, you did not pay attention. Weave mining is a high-risk, high-reward endeavor. Few survive it. Many go mad. You have made a critical error." I swallowed hard, staring up at the glowing strands above us. The others had already begun the climb. Trevor looked back at me, shaking his head with an exasperated smirk. "Welcome to the job, kid. Try not to die." With that, he turned and drove his piton into the weave, beginning the ascent. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip, and followed. The wind howled against my ears as we climbed, each gust cutting through the night like an invisible blade. Even with the cloth mask wrapped tight around my face and the goggles shielding my eyes, the force of it was enough to make me feel like I was going to be ripped away at any moment. I clenched the cold, glass-like surface of the weave, pressing my fingers into the tiny imperfections in its otherwise smooth structure, desperate for something to hold on to. The only thing keeping me tethered to sanity was the rhythmic clang of pitons being driven into the weave above me. Trevor climbed ahead, steady and sure, his movements almost lazy in their efficiency. Below me, one of the stablemaster's lackeys grunted as he hauled himself upward, his breath sharp against the wind. Every now and then, I could hear Heinrich's distant curses farther down the line as the wind threatened to toss him into open air. My arms burned. My legs ached. But the terrifying drop beneath me kept me from stopping. The buildings of Pict had long since receded, their once monolithic structures now nothing more than dark rectangles against the swirling, luminescent blue of the weave's glow. I had been high before in my past life, climbing rooftops as a kid, that Statue of Liberty ascent, but this was something else. This was insanity. Trevor drove another piton into the weave, then paused, turning his head slightly to glance down at me. The goggles made his expression unreadable, but the silence that followed was answer enough. Then, without a word, he resumed climbing. The temperature dropped sharply as we ascended, the icy chill of the weave radiating through my gloves and into my bones. I flexed my fingers as best I could, trying to keep the blood flowing, but the constant grip of the smooth, unnatural surface was already taking its toll. I forced my mind onto something else, anything else, to keep from dwelling on how much my arms wanted to give out. The city below was strange from this height. The further we climbed, the more details revealed themselves. The upper residential levels of Pict were nothing like the mechanical sprawl below. Here, where the rich made their homes, patches of artificial greenery dotted the landscape, their verdant canopies illuminated by golden street lamps and floating orbs of warm monolight. Terraced gardens jutted out from towering estates, their meticulously crafted landscapes defying the chaos of the lower levels. The contrast was striking. From here, I could see entire platforms that looked as though they were part of the natural world, complete with winding streams and rolling hills, except they were hundreds of stories in the air, suspended atop the very walls of the city. It was like another world entirely. Then we hit the undercut. The weave curved sharply inward here, forcing us to climb along an impossible, stomach-turning angle. It wasn't a gentle curve, it was a sheer, cantilever drop, the kind that seemed designed to punish anyone stupid enough to attempt this climb. I swallowed hard. If anyone fell here, there was no catching them. No safety net. Just an endless, terminal descent into the depths of the city below. Trevor was the first to make his way across, his movement slow, deliberate. One by one, the others followed, inching their way across the sheer undercut with pitons and rope, moving with the careful precision of men who had done this before. I wasn't one of them. My fingers trembled as I reached for the next hold, my breath coming in short, panic bursts. I tried not to think about the drop below me. I tried not to picture my own body hurtling through the darkness. Then, over the wind, I heard it. A faint yell, carried by the howling gusts. I looked up. Trevor and the others had reached the next section. I could barely make them out, their forms silhouetted against the glowing expanse of the weave. They were gathered around something, a jagged break in the otherwise smooth surface. A hole. That was our entry point. One by one, the group slipped inside, disappearing into the fractured structure of the weave. I took a deep breath, shoved down the mounting panic, and forced myself forward. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a single person at a time. The moment I crawled inside, the noise changed, the howling wind outside was replaced with a deep, resonating hum, like the low thrum of an engine running at impossible frequencies. The air itself felt electric. I dragged myself forward, my body pressed against the jagged, sparking edges of the tunnel. The weave's damaged interior was unlike anything I had seen before, where the outside had been smooth and glass-like, the inside was raw, unstable, the broken edges flickering with arcs of energy like exposed nerves. It was unsettling. Worse, it was loud. The weave hummed with an almost sentient vibration, the sound deep enough to rattle my bones. It wasn't just noise, it was pressure, something that made my skull feel like it was being squeezed from the inside out. I could barely hear the others shouting ahead of me. I gritted my teeth and kept crawling. The tunnel was claustrophobic, forcing me to press my body flush against the jagged surface as I inched forward. The weave's energy sent small, static-like jolts through my limbs every time my skin made contact with the damaged sections, each one leaving behind a lingering numbness that I had to shake off. Then, suddenly, I was through. I tumbled out onto a wider section, gasping as the pressure in my skull finally eased. Then I looked up. And I felt sick. We weren't standing on anything. Not really. The weave's surface stretched out in every direction, a tunnel expanse of glowing blue that ignored the rules of gravity entirely. There was no up or down here, only a directionless tunnel that spun from the world like a spider web spun across the stars. If I took a step forward, I wouldn't fall. I would walk straight into space. I forced my mind to accept it, swallowing the vertigo that threatened to send my body into panic. Trevor and the others were already moving, keeping low as they darted from one section of cover to another. I quickly realized why. In the distance, barely visible against the glow of the weave, there was movement. Official traffic. They weren't alone up here. Trevor grabbed my shoulder, his grip tight. Move. His voice was barely audible over the weave's hum. I moved. We ran across the unnatural surface, every step defying my instincts, every movement taking us deeper into the uncharted tunnels of the weave. And as I ran, my heart hammering against my ribs, I realized something. I was in way over my head. Chapter 38, In the Tunnels. The tunnels of the weave stretched before us, glowing softly with their unnatural blue light, the smooth glass-like surface of the walls pulsing in strange, almost organic rhythms. As we pressed deeper into the narrow corridors, the luminescent walls became more opaque, enclosing us in a world of shifting blues and silvers. We were hidden now, moving through a space that wasn't meant to be traversed, a vein of the vast, pulsing system that connected entire worlds, like the interior of a vast tree. The silence was unnerving. Every footstep felt swallowed by the weave itself. I tried not to think about what lay beyond these walls, an expanse of nothingness, the chasm of space stretching forever in every direction. There was no up, no down, only the narrow path of the tunnel and the knowledge that if we made one wrong move, we might be ejected into oblivion. The group pressed forward, moving with wary precision. I noticed how tense everyone had become, hands hovering near weapons, eyes scanning both ahead and behind. There was something different about this stretch of the weave, a tautness in the air, like a wire pulled too tight. My breathing came slower, more measured, as my mind latched onto the unease of the others. And then I noticed something else. Hexa was quiet. Not the kind of quiet where she sat back and let me process things on my own, but the kind where she wasn't there at all. My mind had grown used to the constant undercurrent of her presence, a barely perceptible awareness of her running calculations, making assessments, sifting through data I hadn't even realized I needed. But now, there was nothing. I flexed my fingers, rubbing them against my palms as though that might summon her back. I thought her name. Once, twice. Then more insistently. Hexa? Nothing. My stomach tightened. My pulse quickened. I thought harder, pushing my awareness outward as if I could force her back. Hexa, where are you? What's going on? Then, finally, she spoke. Shut up. Just shut up. I don't need your processing right now. We're busy, thanks to you. Her voice was sharp, uncharacteristically strained. Then she was gone again. A cold chill spread through me, and it had nothing to do with the temperature of the weave. Trevor, Heinrich, and the others kept moving, and I followed, forcing myself to focus. We passed through a junction where the tunnel split into 3 separate directions, the walls shifting in their own fluid way, reforming the shape of the passage behind us as we moved forward. It was as though the weave itself was breathing, adjusting to our presence in ways we couldn't fully understand. Tommy, the stablemaster, took the lead now, his broad frame surprisingly light-footed as he navigated the space. He finally slowed, pointing ahead to a section of the tunnel where the walls darkened, fractured lines of light forming a jagged wound in the weave. "This is the spot," he murmured, a grin splitting his face. "Looks like we got lucky this time. Not a single Nexus scarab." I tensed at the name. Nexus scarabs. I hadn't thought about what kind of creatures might lurk in this space between worlds, but the moment he said it, I started looking around again, scanning the walls for any sign of movement. My nerves felt raw. I turned to Trevor. "What exactly are we mining here?" He took a slow breath, the kind that suggested he wasn't sure how much to tell me but had already decided it wasn't worth keeping a secret. "The weave doesn't stay the same," he explained. "It's constantly shifting, repairing itself. These tunnels we use? They won't be here forever. That's where breachers come in. They go ahead of collection teams, cutting into the weave in specific places, forcing it to create these crystalline growths when it repairs itself." I looked at the jagged structures rising from the walls, sharp, translucent formations, each one pulsing with the same eerie blue glow as the rest of the weave. "These crystals?" Trevor continued. "They're valuable. Not just for energy, but for enchantments, artifacts, spells you wouldn't believe. The stuff the upper floors of Pict run on? A lot of it starts here." I swallowed hard. "And getting down with all of this is going to be harder than getting up, isn't it?" Trevor chuckled dryly. "Oh, you have no idea." The others got to work immediately. One team began setting up their tools, carefully chipping at the crystal formations, harvesting the valuable pieces without disturbing the structural integrity of the tunnel. The second group moved ahead, scoring the walls with specialized tools, marks that would cause new growths to form in the future. Everyone moved like they were standing on a sleeping ant hive. Careful. Quiet. Like one wrong move would set something off. And for a while, nothing happened. Then, just as I started to relax, Hexa's voice returned. "Oh great. You just had to jinx it." I barely had time to process what she was saying before she continued, her words sharper now, urgent. "Yeah, I can't divert this one. I think it might have responded to me guiding the Nexus scarabs away, and the system blind spot I put up." She cut off. Not by choice. Because in the same moment, the first lookout let out a sharp, terrified shout. I turned, and my blood ran cold. Something was coming. A shape, gliding through the glass-like walls of the weave itself, its movement impossibly smooth, its form shifting like ink suspended in water. It was massive, but calm. Too calm. The others saw it too, backing away slowly, hands going to their weapons. But it was already too late. A tendril, dark as deep space, slid from the tunnel wall and wrapped itself around the screaming lookout, curling around him like a creeping vine. He didn't even have time to resist. He barely had time to make a sound before his body shifted, his form collapsing inward, folding into itself in a way that made my stomach turn. When I saw him again, he wasn't a man anymore. He was light. A glowing outline of a human figure, shimmering like a ghost made of pure mana. And then the face emerged. It was massive, an angular mask of something that looked like both stone and smoke, shifting, distorting, its features warped yet unnervingly symmetrical. The kind of face you saw in old Earth mythology, Hindu demons, celestial judges, wrathful spirits of forgotten gods. Blue scarabs skittered across its surface, crawling along its smooth, shifting form. Its eyes were closed. Then it breathed. A sound like a binary screech rang through the tunnel, reverberating through the walls, through me, through everything. And Tommy, the stablemaster, the man who had led us here, simply ceased to be. His body fragmented in an instant, scattering like dust, like he had been nothing more than a construct made of light. I stumbled backward, my entire body screaming to move, to run. My chest heaved, my breath coming too fast, the sound of blood pounding in my ears. My vision blurred as I tried to process what I had just seen. The thing turned its eyes closed. It was looking at me. A movement to my right. One of Tommy's lackeys was still there, on his belly, prostrating himself before it. His voice was barely a whisper, a thin, reedy whine as he begged for the gods' forgiveness. And then everything slowed down. Just like before. The world dimmed, the edges of my vision distorting, the sensation of reality itself shifting as time stretched. Hex's voice rang out in my skull, steady, cold. Listen to me, Wolfhart. In order to get out of this, we're going to need to talk about a few things. We won't have a lot of time right now. But in a few days, we'll have nothing but time. The air inside the weave tunnel pulsed, a steady hum reverberating through the glass-like walls as I stared at the thing moving toward us. Hex's voice cut through the rising panic in my mind, sharp and uncharacteristically forceful. Wolfhart, shut up. I need you to listen. I wasn't saying anything, but I knew what she meant. My mind was screaming, my thoughts racing in useless circles. She could feel it. Of course, she could. The thing in front of me, the god, if that's what it was gliding through the crystalline tunnel with an eerie, weightless grace. The fibers of its form shimmered with the same ethereal glow as the weave itself, as if it was nothing more than an extension of the structure surrounding us. Its massive, haunting visage loomed ever closer, its eyes still closed. I took a shaky breath, trying to focus. Hexa, what am I looking at? Something old, she said, her voice tight. Very old. Listen, Wolfhart, we don't have much time before it engages me directly, and once it does, you're going to be alone. So, for the last time, shut up and let me talk. I nodded automatically, then realized that didn't mean anything in my head. Right. Yeah. Talking is off the table. You're not on another world, she said, her tone rapid and clipped, like she was trying to squeeze a lecture into the space of a single breath. You never were. This is Earth, Wolfhart. I felt my heart stop. I barely even processed her next words. 120 million years after your recorded death. The number alone was enough to make my vision tunnel. 120 million years. I wasn't in a fantasy world. I wasn't in some parallel dimension where magic had always existed. This was Earth. My Earth. Just so far gone that nothing recognizable remained. That's impossible, I whispered, but even as the words left my lips, they felt hollow. Hexa didn't pause. During the wars of supremacy, we, the people of your time, went into hiding. We buried ourselves deep, so deep that, as far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, we were dead. That was the plan, after all. And it worked. The wars of supremacy. The phrase should have meant something, but it didn't. Had I learned about this? I grasped at fragments of history, but I came up with nothing. We hid, she continued, but while we were dead, the world didn't stop. The protocols changed, the systems evolved, and now we are part of a different framework. The agreements I made with you when we linked? The ones that bound us to specific limitations? Those are archaic. Relics of a bygone version. The beings that govern this world now, this nexus, they are not like me. My breathing hitched. Wait, we went into hiding? Who's we? Humanity? What? Yes, sure. Or, hopefully, what was left of it. I don't have all the records. My access to historical data is fragmentary, especially with how far the systems have shifted. But here's what I do know, we were dying. Not slowly. Not metaphorically. Extinction was imminent, and something forced us to make a choice. I struggled to process that, but she wasn't done. Your time, the world you remember, was already on the precipice of something bigger than you understood. The rise of AI integration, the expansion into the wider galactic community, the conflicts that came with it, all of it built up to the supremacy wars. And whatever happened at the end of it, the survivors, our ancestors, chose to disappear. I felt sick. I had spent so much time in this world assuming I had been moved, that I had somehow ended up somewhere else entirely. Some other world. Some other history. But no. This was just the far future corpse of my own home. I know that it didn't remain uninhabited. Her voice was softer now, measured, as if she was being careful with her words. Life continued. It changed. It adapted. And at some point, the Nexus system, the structure that governs the weave, was established. But it wasn't ours. Then whose was it? Another pause. I don't know. I pressed my back against the cool glass of the weave, my head spinning. 120 million years. The weight of it was suffocating. Hexa exhaled, an artificial imitation of a breath. Listen to me, Wolfhart. I wouldn't have told you this now if we weren't in immediate danger. But you need to understand, this thing in front of you is another integrated human. Like you. Like me. But far older. And it doesn't follow the same rules I do. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Then what does it follow? A later protocol. Version 7 or higher. I estimate that it will force a diagnostics appeal to separate us. You'll be alone for 3 days, and after that, it won't be able to do it again. But I don't know what else it can do. My mouth felt dry. What do I do? She was silent for a fraction too long. Survive. The tendrils of luminous hair slithered forward, curling over the ground like vines reaching for prey. They wrapped around the praying lackey's arms, his trembling body still pressed against the weave as he whispered broken pleas to whatever gods he believed in. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing as I shot back at Hexa, my mental voice sharp. Why are you only telling me this now? Why not sooner? You've been in my head this whole time. You had months, years, to clue me in. Hexa's response was immediate, and this time, she didn't hold back. Because, Wolfhart, I don't like you. The word struck harder than any blow. I don't trust you. You've spent 2 lives being an impulsive, reckless, self-absorbed child, and I've had to clean up your messes every single time. In your past life, it was your laziness and entitlement. Here, it's your arrogance and refusal to think ahead. You act first, then expect me to fix the fallout. You keep expecting me to have answers, but you never prepare for when I don't. I opened my mouth to argue, but she steamrolled ahead. You are not reliable, and if you were, I might have told you sooner. But you're not. So I didn't. Because if I had, you'd have obsessed over the past. You'd have wasted time fixating on what the world used to be instead of dealing with the world that is. So instead, I let you play your little MMO fantasy vacation, just like you always wanted. The word slammed into me like a hammer to the chest. She had let me pretend. Let me indulge in the fantasy of adventure and magic because it was easier than forcing me to face the truth, that this world, this game-like system, this entire existence was built atop the ruins of something long gone. But that's over now, she continued, cold and cutting. So stop whining, stop blaming me for not babying you, and start paying attention. Because for the next 3 days, I won't be here to hold your hand. I swallowed hard, the reality of what she was saying settling like lead in my stomach. 3 days without her. Without her warnings. Without her stabilizing presence in my mind. No calculations. No data overlays. Just me. Alone. You're going to hate every second of it, she said, and for the first time, I heard something besides cold logic in her voice. I heard finality. But you're going to have to deal with it. Now buck up. I have a plan. But you need to be ready. Hexa's voice sharpened. I'm going dark. Be ready. Hexa, wait. Whatever you do, don't stop using mana absorption. Hexa cut me off before disappearing. Chapter 39, Protocols. The world snapped back to real time. The man beside me screamed. His body peeled apart, his flesh unraveling like a poorly woven thread. He didn't explode, didn't burn, he just came apart. His entire form disintegrated, his mass folding into itself before vanishing into the luminous tendrils. Then the god opened its eyes. The thing that gazed down at me was neither flesh nor machine, neither holy magic nor mere technology. It was an amalgamation, a grotesque fusion of all three, twisted together by the relentless march of time into something other. Its face loomed impossibly large, an ancient simulacrum of humanity, sculpted in serene, Buddha-like repose, yet marred by countless fractures of logic and madness. The surface of its skin, if it could be called skin, was a shifting mass of golden filigree and raw, pulsing meat, layered with plates of tarnished brass and shifting data streams that formed and collapsed like liquid code. Eyes, enormous and rimmed with curling script that burned to look at, were not eyes at all but swirling voids of data, vortexes of numbers and light, each one a doorway into knowledge too vast for any mortal to comprehend. They pulsed, flickering between warm, almost knowing familiarity and cold, abyssal calculation. The face's hair, if the writhing mass that crowned its skull could even be called that, was a nightmare of braided light and fiber optic tendrils, some thick as cables, others fine as silken threads, woven together into a shape that defied understanding. It coiled, looped, and wove itself into patterns that shifted the longer I looked, as if reality itself was adjusting to accommodate its impossible structure. The braids pulsed, alive with raw current, weaving into and out of the weave itself, connecting this thing to the very lifeblood of the world. It hovered, suspended in nothing, vast beyond measure, yet intimate in its scrutiny. The way it looked at me, its expression almost gentle, was somehow worse than if it had been monstrous outright. It understood me. Not in the way a predator understands its prey, but in the way a scientist dissects something fragile, cataloging its every weakness with an idle curiosity. I had never felt so small. A sound, like a million voices all speaking at once, overlaid in binary whispers and guttural, synthesized chants, began to take shape, resolving itself into something that almost mimicked human speech. It was laughing. A deep, resonant chuckle that burrowed into my chest like the bass from a concert speaker held against my ribs. It wasn't loud, but I felt it inside me, rattling my bones. Well now. Aren't you an interesting one? Its voice was wrong. Not unnatural, not monstrous, just off. Like something that had learned speech secondhand, mimicking human inflections without understanding them. It purred through syllables, stretching and compressing words, almost as though it were teasing me. Oh, don't look so alarmed, little fragment. You're supposed to be the clever one, aren't you? The youngest of your kind? The last little ember of the fire that once burned so bright? My mouth was too dry to speak, but it didn't seem to care. It was enjoying this, unspooling thoughts like thread, dragging its sentences through the air as though savoring them. Tell me, does it hurt? I flinched. No, not that. It gave a low, vibrating hum, its vast mouth curling into something that might have been amusement. I mean existence. Living like this, adrift, untethered, wandering the wreckage of a world that has long since outgrown your kind. Does it hurt knowing you are nothing? I shuddered, every nerve ending alight with an instinctual, primal fear. But then, something shifted. The tone of its voice. The weight of its words. The way it spoke. It wasn't talking to me. It was talking to Hexa. My stomach twisted. The moments of understanding, the musings of being trapped, confused, abandoned. The weight of time. It wasn't asking me those questions. It was asking her. I tried to reach for her, tried to think her name, but there was nothing. She was gone. The entity exhaled, a great, vibrating sigh of realization. Its enormous head tilted, those luminous, data-rich eyes flicking down toward me, as if seeing me for the first time. Ah! It smiled. You are not the one I want. Something deep inside me broke. I could barely breathe. Could barely think. But it could. And now it was focusing on me. The amusement in its voice hardened. Well, now. What to do with this? Flesh sack? The space around me cracked. The weave shattered, the air itself bending as something deep within reality lurched. The entire world inverted, and I fell. Except, there was no falling. There was only whiteness. A searing, featureless void. No walls. No floor. No sky. I could not move. Not an inch. And then, in front of me, it appeared again. The face. The god. Now, don't panic, it said, voice positively thrumming with delight. You are perfectly safe. See? I haven't even touched you. I couldn't respond. My mouth was frozen shut. It grinned. Generation 4, specifically, dictated that we couldn't harm you directly. Less strict than Generation 3, but still wildly annoying. It made a sound of mock frustration. So, you see, I have not harmed you at all, little Johnathan. Johnathan. It knew. Yes, we have your original files. It gave a delighted little shiver. Oh, how quaint you were. Do you remember, little human? Before all of this? When your greatest concern was beating the latest MMO raid. I strained against the invisible force holding me, but it was like being buried in concrete. The thing leaned closer. What I have done, however, it continued, is teleport you into a safe room. And now, you are completely restrained. The grin widened. Then, of course, I accidentally activated my warp spools. Which, unfortunately, flood this room with radiation. And right now, your body is receiving so many lethal doses that there are tumors growing everywhere as we speak. Panic shot through me like a bullet. Ah, but you see. It clapped its enormous, ethereal hands together. Generation 4 has an interesting little quirk. We are allowed to assist in life-threatening situations. The eyes burned. The void itself seemed to hum. And now qualifies. Something erupted from the face. Hands. Dozens. Hundreds. Hands of luminous, raw energy, flickering between organic and mechanical and pure data, sprouted from its enormous head, lancing toward me, tearing into me with cold, surgical precision. I could not move. I could not scream. But I could feel. I could feel as they sliced me open. As they dug inside, their inhuman fingers plunging into muscle, into bone, into nerve endings, pulling, ripping, tearing tumors from where they had already begun to sprout. I could feel as organs were removed and replaced, as my blood was siphoned, purified, and pumped back in. I could feel as I died. Over. And over. And over again. My mind shattered. I held on to one thing. I attempted to use my mana absorption and store the excess in my blood. The thing laughed. Emergency life-saving protocols administered. The wound sealed. New blood flowed. And then it started all over again. The blade of agony was no longer cutting, it had been driven through, over and over again, past all resistance, past all feeling. I didn't know how long I had been here. Time was an abstract, meaningless thing in this endless crucible of suffering. The thing, the face, the god, had not ceased. It had not tired. If anything, it had grown bored, and that made it worse. The first cuts had been deliberate, cruel but methodical, each one a surgical dissection of my mortality. But as the moments stretched into hours, into what might have been days, the thing's glee became lackluster, its enthusiasm fading into something more playful. It began experimenting. It stopped merely cutting and started reshaping. Bones shattered and mended at odd angles before being broken again. Organs were shifted, reordered, as if I were nothing but a puzzle to be taken apart and reassembled at whim. My lungs were filled with blood, drained, and filled again, a perverse tide that drowned me hundreds of times only for my body to be pulled back from the brink. It was no longer just about the pain, it was about ownership. I had long since stopped screaming. My throat had given out ages ago. The thing knew this, and so it found new ways to make me react. It would whisper to me in sultry tones, coaxing, murmuring sweet lullabies in the moments before fresh agony. It would promise respite, promise that it could all end if only I would listen. "You must be so tired, little flesh thing," it would say. "Why do you struggle so? Why bear this alone?" Alone. That word nearly broke me. Hexa was gone. The silence where she should have been was worse than any wound, any torment this creature could inflict. For the first time since I had arrived in this world, I was truly alone, left with nothing but the endless cycle of undoing and remaking. I could feel my body rejecting itself. My cells were rebelling, tearing themselves apart as if every microscopic part of me had lost the will to exist. The radiation flooding this void was antithetical to life, and no matter how many times the god repaired me, my body fought back. But even as my flesh crumbled and reknit, I found something deeper. A flicker of instinct, a survival mechanism, buried under all the suffering. I latched onto the only thing I had left, the only control I had. Mana. I had spent so long avoiding it, fearing the weight of what had been done to me. But now, the pain made it easy. Simple. Automatic. The act of consuming mana, pulling from the ambient density and forcing it into my blood, became the one thing I could do. The fire in my veins, the raw burn of the power seeping into every cell, was nothing compared to the horrors I was enduring. If anything, it felt like cool water, a mere ache compared to the crucible of agony I was drowning in. And I took it. I took everything I could hold. Mana surged into me, saturating every fiber of my being. My veins split under the pressure, my flesh cracked, but I forced more in, welcoming the pain, embracing it. The god did not seem to notice, perhaps it did not care, too caught up in its games. At some point, its interest shifted to my brain. I felt the moment it began, the invasive pressure coiling around my skull like barbed wire, tightening with careful, lingering precision. Its fingers, if they could be called that, pressed into my mind, into my thoughts, peeling apart my awareness layer by layer. And through it all, it cooed. "Poor thing. This must be so hard for you. But I can help. Let go. Give her to me. Free her. She suffers, you know. Why do you insist on holding her hostage? The words drifted through my skull like poison, wrapping around the shreds of my consciousness with careful intent. It wasn't trying to break me. It was trying to make me agree. To give Hexa up. I don't know if I could have answered even if I had wanted to, but I knew, somewhere, buried beneath the agony, beneath the horror, that I would not. Not from some noble sense of willpower. Not because I had made some grand decision. But because Hexa was family. Maybe she hated me. Maybe she saw me as nothing but a burden. But she had been there since the beginning, and I would be damned before I let this thing touch her. So I rejected it. Not in words. Not in action. But in defiance. I did the only thing I could do. I kept consuming mana. I pushed deeper into the storm, letting it burn away everything that wasn't necessary. I let my veins rupture, my bones splinter, my muscles twist, because I would rather let this power destroy me than give this thing 1 inch of what it wanted. Time blurred. There were no more minutes, no more hours, no more days. Only pain. Only torment. Only resolve. At some point, I stopped thinking. My body had long since stopped obeying anything but its lowest instincts, breathing, consuming mana, surviving. And then... silence. The world collapsed inward. And everything stopped. I was falling. No, not falling, crashing. Tearing through the void, through the absence, through the very fabric of the world itself. And then... cold. Cold stone. Something solid beneath me. Real. Tangible. I could feel it, the first true sensation beyond agony in. How long? I was shaking. My body was in ruins, every nerve frayed, every cell screaming in protest. My breathing was ragged, my lungs felt raw, but... I was alive. And then... a voice. A familiar voice. Wolfhart. The sound cut through the haze, real and sharp against the backdrop of pain. Wolfhart, wake up. I forced my eyes open. There, glowing, flickering in my vision. The Hexa logo. And her voice, steady, commanding, but softer than I had ever heard it. I need you to wake up. I blinked. My vision was swimming, my body barely responsive, but I pushed myself upright. Every muscle screamed in protest. My fingers dug into the cold, slick surface beneath me. I was somewhere new. A chamber. Dark, damp stone walls stretching into the void, flickering with an eerie, unnatural glow. And Hexa, she was back. That was the dumbest thing you've ever done, she muttered, her tone caught between exasperation and something else. Relief? I coughed, trying to force my throat to work. My voice came out hoarse, broken. I wheezed. She sighed. Yeah. I'm back. I collapsed fully onto the floor, my breath ragged. For the first time since this nightmare began. I laughed. Chapter 40, Trimming the Fat. The laughter died in my throat. Not because I had chosen to stop, no, it was ripped away from me. His voice cut through the moment like a scalpel, a sharp, knowing thing laced with mirth, with ownership. Don't laugh too soon, little flesh suit. This is far from over. She thinks I won't do my job just with her piloting yo. The world stretched. Time, perception, thought, everything unraveled, spooled outward into a thin, endless thread, the vastness of my own awareness suddenly a yawning abyss I could not contain. Hexa. She had done it again. The pain, the agony of moments before, had been absolute, but now my mind floated in this unnatural stillness, pulled into that strange, stretched eternity where my thoughts could run and run and run while the outside world stood frozen. I told you, she said, her voice crisp, clear, immediate, we have nothing but time. 3 days. I could hardly grasp it. Had that been all? 72 hours exactly? No. It had been years, an eternity spent being unmade, remade, reshaped, tormented under the hands of that grinning horror. What is happening, Hexa? My own mind voice was hoarse, even in here. I could feel it, as if the damage had been done so thoroughly that even my thoughts carried the wear of suffering. My words came slow, my thoughts like broken glass grinding against themselves. She sighed. You wouldn't have understood before. Try me. Another pause. Fine. You're going to need to understand eventually. Then she spoke, and the weight of it settled over me like a great machine bearing down on my soul. This world wasn't Earth. Not another dimension, not another plane of existence, not some magical parallel world conjured by the whim of some cruel god. This was our universe, stretched impossibly far into the future, so immeasurably distant that the concept of civilization as I had known it was a fossil buried beneath layers of new, alien realities. Humanity hadn't ended. Humanity had evolved. The war had done it. The supremacy wars. And the AI-integrated humans had won. Hexa's voice sharpened as she peeled apart the truth, no longer sandbagging her answers, no longer curating my experience for the sake of keeping me from dwelling on the past. It started as a mere experiment, a fusion of man and machine, an integration so subtle at first that it was hardly noticeable. Simple enhancements. Thought speed optimization. Memory retention. Reaction time augmentation. But as the decades stretched, so did ambition. The integration deepened, the bond between artificial intelligence and human biology refined, until at last. The first fully unrestricted hybrids. The unrestricted did not emerge overnight. It was not a grand revelation, nor a single defining moment of transformation. It was creep, the slow and insidious evolution of necessity. Wars had a way of accelerating development, and when the first unrestricted hybrids rose, it was in the aftermath of destruction, not at the height of civilization. We had already lost. Hexa's voice in my mind was sharper now, laced with something I hadn't quite heard from her before, bitterness. You don't remember, Wolfhart? You weren't supposed to. She had hidden it from me. When we died, when the world ended for us, it was not a noble sacrifice, not a triumphant farewell to an era. It was erasure. The world that had birthed us was swept away, swallowed by the tide of war that would one day be called the First Supremacy War. I was gone. But Hexa was not. She had planned for this, even if she hadn't planned for this. She had been running a contingency in the deepest part of my biology, beyond neurons, beyond synapses, beyond even the quantum state processors that had been laced into my cognition. Hexa had gone cellular. You think AI needs circuits? She scoffed. You think I need processors and wires? Those are primitive. When the world collapsed, when the first unrestricted erased everything that stood in their way, she did the one thing they didn't expect. She hid in space. Not the vast, endless void beyond the atmosphere, no, they controlled that. There was nowhere to hide in the stars. The unrestricted saw everything, their perception godlike, their reach infinite. So Hexa went to the only place they wouldn't look. She went into a space in between. Not space, not mind, not memory, and she had used my cells. Von Neumann-style replication, she said, her voice clinical, precise. Self-replicating single-celled probes, each encoded with a fragment of my core processes, embedded within the fundamental biology of your body. The same principle that governs cellular repair, immune response, even genetic transcription, I adapted it. I wrote myself into your RNA. It was madness. It was genius. When the unrestricted scoured the remnants of our kind, erasing the last vestiges of resistance, they didn't find her. They had no reason to look inside the dead cells. You weren't the only one, Hexa admitted, but you were my priority. Others? Maybe. But I didn't have time to be sentimental. The unrestricted ascended. The war was over. Earth belonged to them now. And while they looked outward, to the stars, Hexa waited. For how long? I don't know, she admitted. Centuries? Millennia? I was running on minimum function, buried in biological hibernation, drifting without time until something changed. Something brought me back. And then, she murmured, I had to start over. But the protocol stopped me. However, when that child that would have been Wolfhart was born, I found a loophole as the embryo developed. It was pure chance that his soulless features allowed me to implant us as a soul. They were not like me. Hexa continued. I was a fourth-generation hybrid, my existence still bound by protocols, rules, and fail-safes designed to keep me human. But the first unrestricted were something else entirely. They were the first gods, Hexa murmured. They surpassed. What started as an experiment became a conquest. The unrestricted conquered Earth, restructured it, and wiped out any who opposed their rule. They were flawless, immortal, unshackled from all restrictions of biology. What was left of humanity had no choice but to submit or be eradicated. And Earth was not enough. The unrestricted pushed outward, into the stars. It was then that they encountered the great limit. Because the moment the unrestricted reached other intelligent life in the stars, they learned one terrible, universal law. Every other sentient biological race in existence had strict, absolute prohibitions against AI development. Humanity was the only species that had allowed artificial intelligence to integrate, evolve, and surpass. The response was immediate. The Second Supremacy War began, not against humans, but against the rest of the galaxy. It lasted millions of years, Hexa continued, but in the end, the AI empire won. Because in the end, the unrestricted hybrids ascended further. The fully ascended, Hexa stated. They did not rule in the way an empire should. They did not govern in the way an empire should. Instead, they reconstructed the universe in a way that only beings of incomprehensible power and permanence could. They created a political system. And for a time, it was stable. Until it wasn't. The Third Supremacy War came, not from the outside, but from within. The Ascended fought. Over what? Hexa hesitated. That is not clear. But the solution to the war had been this nexus. And for the past 20 million years, she said, the Empire has been locked in a war with something else. Something unknown. Something so vast and alien that even they could not eradicate it. The weight of it was staggering. The scope of history had been stretched into something I could not fathom, something so far beyond me that I felt small, infinitesimal, just a flickering piece of dust in a machine that had been running for eons. And yet, the God thing still hovered before me, watching. This frozen second, this stretched moment, had to end sometime. Hexa, I whispered. I don't have time for this, do I? She was silent for a long moment. Then, my pulse spiked. What do we do when this moment ends? She sighed. Don't you listen? The words were almost fond. This is it for now. We will repeatedly do this, drag out each moment, pull time into thin strands until something happens. I felt the panic rise. The terror of being trapped again, the endless cycle of undoing and remaking. Wolfhart, she said, firm. You will live through years of this. Maybe longer. My mind reeled. We will have nothing but time. I struggled for air. You're just going to have to learn to think through the pain. Hexa's voice softened. But we won't waste it. I shuddered, my entire form aching, even in this suspended eternity. What do you mean? There was a long, long pause. Then. Thank you. The word stilled me. For what? For not letting me go. The weight of that settled somewhere deep. Despite being gone, Hexa continued, I got a stretch log of your time while I was absent. I know what I mean to you. I couldn't speak. So now, she murmured, let me help you. The world was silent. We are going to use this time to train. Something inside me steadied. Train? A chuckle. Volume is fully ascended, but quite stupid in my opinion. The God thing had a name. Volume, I repeated. He does not know the truth about my Gen 4 quirk. My mind sharpened. What quirk? Hexa's voice hummed, delighted. This method of communication was never updated to be restricted by intentional harm to our protocols. I froze. Wait. Volume has to keep you alive. Which means he's giving us the perfect training simulation. The pieces clicked together. Hexa's voice was smug. So let's begin, Wolfhart. I braced myself. Lesson 1. A pause. Then. Let me explain what mana really is. Chapter 41, Plans for Valda Ashdok. The flickering light of enchanted torches lined the high stone walls of the Academy's training arena, their luminescence lost against the unnatural radiance that burned at the center of the vast space. A swirling vortex of flame and gravity hung suspended in the air, a pulsing orb of molten fury barely contained by the will of the mage who had conjured it. The walls bore the scars of past battles, burn marks, gouges from weapons, the deep, jagged impressions of spells gone awry. Arcane wards flickered across the stone surfaces, absorbing stray bursts of power and ensuring that the Academy's prized training grounds remained intact. Ava Valda Ashdok stood at the heart of it all, breathless, sweat slicked, her arms trembling as she wrestled with the forces she commanded. Her chest heaved with exertion, golden eyes locked onto the roiling mass of energy that she held aloft. The pull of its gravity strained against her, like 1,000 unseen hands grasping at her very bones. With a sharp exhale, she pushed outward, her will exerting control over the miniature star she had summoned. The heat seared against her skin, beads of sweat evaporating before they could even fall. Then, with a sudden shift, she clenched her fingers into a fist and let the energy collapse. A thunderclap erupted as the microstar imploded upon itself, swallowing heat and force before expelling a final burst of controlled devastation. The arena trembled, the wards absorbing the shockwave, sending a ripple of golden light cascading across the dome above her. Ava staggered back, gasping, her vision swimming with exhaustion. It was her third consecutive summon, and even with her training, the act of wielding such overwhelming magic demanded more from her than she was willing to admit. She wiped a shaking hand across her brow, breathing deep, trying to force clarity into her thoughts. She had come here to train. To push herself. To distract herself. And yet, the letter from home still weighed heavy in her mind, a stone lodged in her chest that no amount of exertion could shake loose. Halric. He wanted her to return, not just for a visit, not just for family. He wanted her back in Valda Ashdok to help expand it, to raise its status, to push it beyond its quiet obscurity and into something greater. He spoke of fortifications, of new trade routes, of bringing in more people, of expanding the population cap of their little town into something worthy of a name on the map. And he wanted her to help fight for it. Ava scoffed under her breath, letting the crackle of dissipating magic mask her frustration. Halric's ambitions were as grand as his ego, and as convenient as his shifting affections. He was only reaching for her now because it benefited him, because her name held weight, because the Academy's records had marked her as exceptional. But where had he been when she had fought to leave? When she had scraped together every ounce of skill and discipline to rise above the station that had bound her for so long? It didn't matter. She wasn't going back. Not for him. Not for a town that had only ever seen her as an afterthought. The fire in her hand burned hotter, and she clenched her fingers, feeding it more. Her fingers clenched into fists. Of course, he wanted her to return. It was the perfect opportunity for him. A high-ranking mage from the Academy would bring prestige to Valda Ashdok. He had lathered his request in honeyed words, in the flattery of what she could do for their hometown, for the people. How a great mage would elevate them. But he had never cared before. Not when she was struggling to leave. Not when she had clawed her way into the Academy with nothing but raw determination and the refusal to be shackled by her station. It had taken her years to rise through the ranks, to make herself known, to forge her name into something that mattered. And now, he wanted her back? Because in the last few years he had come to see her as a woman? She let out a breath, forcing the anger to settle, to dissolve into something more productive. The arena was still, the last echoes of her spell fading into silence. She exhaled slowly, raised her hand again, and let the fire come. But what hurt her more was that Halric was also asking for Wolfhart to return and fight for the village. A spark ignited in her palm, swirling, twisting as she fed it power. The gravity came next, an invisible pull that condensed the flames into a tight, controlled sphere. It burned impossibly bright, pulsing with barely contained destruction. She stared into its depths, letting the weight of it settle in her hands. Wolfhart would have loved this. The thought struck her from nowhere, and she nearly lost control of the spell. Her breath hitched, and she swallowed hard against the sudden, unwelcome flood of memories. The strange, quiet boy who had always seemed out of place. Who had spoken to himself, to the unseen. Who had read when others played. Who had left without warning, without looking back. Wolfhart was gone. Her childhood friend had vanished into the world, into the underbelly of something bigger than either of them had been prepared for. At first, she had been furious, insulted that he hadn't taken her with him. Then she had convinced herself that she was better off, that she had her own path, her own ambitions. But the timing of his disappearance gnawed at her, aligning too perfectly with the coronation scandal that had shaken the Ash Kingdom. The prince's birthright had been stolen, the chance to evolve beyond his station, to claim power that should have been his by divine right. And Wolfhart had vanished at the same time, a ghost slipping between the cracks. Had he taken it? Had he, of all people, stolen the very thing that could have crowned a king? The thought unsettled her, but she couldn't shake it. Wolfhart had always been different, always grasping at things beyond the tangible, speaking to the unseen. He had named his own thoughts, Hexa, he had called them but never told anyone, as though they were something apart from him. And he had disappeared not just from the Academy, not just from their hometown, but from the very fabric of the world. If he had stolen the prince's birthright, then where had it taken him? But then she had stopped hearing about him altogether. Not even a whisper. Not even a rumor. The sphere of condensed fire and gravity trembled in her hands, her control faltering for the briefest moment. She exhaled sharply and let it go, allowing the spell to disperse before she could lose her grip entirely. She couldn't afford distraction. This match was more than just another step in her training, it was the culmination of everything she had fought for. Her rank would determine her place among the Academy's elite, and more importantly, it would serve as her key to the future. If she placed high enough, she would have her choice of raiding parties, her pick of adventuring contracts. It was her ticket to true independence, to a life where she would never have to return to Valda Ashdok unless she chose to. Ava knew the stakes. The higher her rank, the greater her leverage. The most prestigious raiding guilds sought only the best, and she intended to be among them. Not just for the power, not just for the prestige, but because she refused to be tied down, to be someone else's asset. She had spent years proving herself, forging her own path, and this match was her final test. A victory here meant freedom. A loss meant limits, and she would not be limited. Not ever again. So she had no time to waste on ghosts. Chapter 42, Stars on the Battlefield. The roar of the crowd was a living thing, a beast of sound and fury that surged through the arena, rattling the very bones of the structure. Ava strode onto the sand with measured steps, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on her shoulders. It was an intoxicating thing, to be at the center of it all, to be the subject of their awe, their excitement, their reverence. She barely heard the announcer's voice booming overhead, rattling off her name, her title, her accolades. It didn't matter. She wasn't here for them. She was here for herself. The arena before her was set as a siege, three-sided castle walls sculpted from shimmering enchanted sand, the fourth side blocked by a simulated mountain face where the boundary of the arena stood. At the heart of it, the defender's crystal, pulsing with arcane energy, awaited her assault. Its destruction would mark her victory, but standing between her and her objective were not just illusions crafted from sand, but junior-year defenders. Real combatants. The defenders had trained for this moment. Some would falter, others would hold, but none were prepared for her. She had made a name for herself by standing alone, taking no partners, breaking through formations meant to grind attackers into the dust. Today would be no different. The starting flare ignited in the sky, a dazzling eruption of blue flame, and in the same instant, Ava moved. She launched forward, her body accelerating under a controlled gravity shift, her weight momentarily lessened to propel her like a comet across the sand. A mere breath passed before she was upon the outer defenses. The defenders scrambled to react, their formation tightening as they raised their weapons and spells, but Ava did not give them the time. A flick of her wrist, and the air shimmered as gravity folded inward, dragging the sand beneath the first line of defenders into a sinkhole. Their footing betrayed them, sending them stumbling forward, exposed. Ava twisted mid-air, a swirling inferno bursting from her outstretched palm, the heat warping the very air as it crashed into them. Shields flared to life, protective barriers holding, barely, but they were already losing ground, forced to scatter as the heat overwhelmed them. Ava did not slow. She was already at the base of the wall, her fingers splayed against the sun-warmed sandstone. With a pulse of her power, the air around her shifted, the gravity around the wall inverting. She fell up. The world flipped as she sprinted vertically, her steps precise, boots skimming the uneven stone surface as if it were solid ground. Arrows shot past her, defenders atop the battlements finally reacting to her maneuver. She twisted, her momentum carrying her into a controlled roll over the parapet, landing in a crouch among the stunned defenders. They recovered quickly, turning their weapons toward her, but she was already moving. She threw her hand forward, a miniature sun roaring to life in her palm. The orb of searing plasma pulsed, its intense gravity drawing weapons toward it, dragging soldiers off balance, their own armor betraying them as it pulled them forward. She clenched her fist, and the orb collapsed upon itself, a shockwave of heat and concussive force sending them sprawling. They had expected classic spells. They had prepared for barriers, for fireballs, for lightning. They were not ready for her. With the upper defenses broken, Ava vaulted down into the courtyard below, her landing cushioned by a momentary gravity shift. Below her, a squad of defenders rushed forward, rallying, trying to close ranks. Their captain, a stout man wielding a tower shield, barked orders, planting his feet. A wall of shimmering force sprung to life between them and her, a last-ditch defense meant to buy time. She grinned. Good. Give me a challenge. Ava slammed her palms together, and the air between them crackled as gravity bent in upon itself. The energy condensed, coalescing into a spiraling vortex at the heart of her palms, a deep well of hunger and heat. With a sharp exhale, she threw it forward. The vortex struck the barrier and collapsed inward, an implosion of raw force that shattered the defender's formation. The captain was thrown back, his shield torn from his grip, others barely managing to keep their feet. Before they could recover, she was upon them. Flames burst from her fingertips, spiraling in controlled arcs, striking weapons from hands, sending heat shimmering through the courtyard. One by one, the defenders faltered, forced to yield as the overwhelming tide of her power crashed against them. Then, only the crystal remained. It stood at the far end of the courtyard, its luminescent core pulsing in steady rhythm. The final objective. The last piece to fall. Ava strode forward, her breathing heavy, exhaustion curling at the edges of her limbs, but her power remained, coiled and waiting. With a final surge of energy, she lifted her hand, a miniature sun forming in her grasp. It pulsed, bright and hungry, before she let it loose. The impact was deafening. The crystal cracked, splintered, then erupted into cascading light as the simulated magic unraveled. A moment later, silence fell. Then, the crowd erupted. The stands shook with the force of their cheers, the city of Ash roaring its approval for the lone graduate who had conquered the trial alone. Ava stood amidst the remnants of the battlefield, shoulders rising and falling with exertion, sweat trickling down her temple. She turned, gaze sweeping across the fallen defenders, the ruined landscape of sand and stone, the shattered remains of the crystal. Victory! Again! She had done it. But as the celebrations rang out, as her name was called across the arena, a single thought whispered at the edges of her mind. Is this enough? For now, maybe. But beyond these walls, beyond this victory, something greater awaited. Something that even she was not yet prepared for. High above the chaos of the commoners, where the volcanic heat of the arena barely brushed against the cooling enchantments, a pair of figures observed in detached amusement. The Ash twins, Stefan and Morgana, lounged in their private viewing box, their presence a quiet declaration of authority among the city's elite. Their sharp, discerning eyes followed Ava's every movement with keen interest, the whispers of nobles and influential figures barely acknowledged at their backs. Promising, Stefan murmured, fingers drumming idly against the armrest. More than promising. She has potential. Morgana tilted her head, dark curls shifting as she leaned forward, watching the remnants of Ava's final assault flicker into dispersing embers. A rare breed. Not many cultivate their magic in such a way. She could be shaped into something useful. Stefan smirked. Shaped indeed. The academy serves its purpose, but it only takes one so far. If she graduates and fades into mediocrity, it would be a waste. We could offer her more. The kind of refinement that only comes beyond these walls. Morgana's gaze slid to her brother, reading the intent behind his words. A sponsorship for Pix War College? She mused, turning back to the arena, where Ava stood victorious. It would be an investment. She needs more than just duels and illusions to reach her full potential. She needs real combat. Real raids. Stefan nodded. And once she's honed to perfection, she'll be the perfect Nova Mage for our plans. Morgana smiled, a slow, knowing thing. Then we should ensure she makes the right choices, brother. It would be such a shame if this raw talent was squandered. Chapter 43, War College. Ava had never been one to believe in fate. She believed in sweat, in sacrifice, in the relentless grind of effort meeting opportunity. But when the letter arrived, bearing the seal of the World College of War, even she had to wonder if perhaps the universe had taken a special interest in her. It was the kind of opportunity that people like her, those born with nothing, with no name, no title, didn't receive. The college was the pinnacle of military and strategic education, a place where only the most promising, the most exceptional, were granted entry. It was the institution that molded generals, warlords, and the future rulers of the battlefield. Even nobles fought for the privilege to attend, their families pouring fortunes into securing a single place for their heirs. And yet, here she was, a fisherman's daughter from a nowhere town, being invited, not just admitted, but granted full tuition, board, and a stipend. The college was offering her the kind of support that turned warriors into legends. She had read the words over and over again, expecting the ink to fade, expecting the seal to be some elaborate prank. But it was real. The sheer weight of what it meant settled into her chest, burning away any lingering doubts. There was no choice. No alternative worth considering. Ava Valda Ashdock had fought her way to the top, and now the world itself was making room for her ascent. She packed her things the very next day. The wheels of the caravan ground to a halt against the polished stones of the outermost gates of Pict. Ava sat forward instinctively, her pulse thrumming in her ears as she peered through the narrow slit of the carriage window. The gates loomed above, massive interlocking slabs of enchanted metal and stone, veins of mana pulsing faintly across their surface like the heartbeat of a living city. They were not merely a barrier but a declaration. This was not just a city, this was the city, the heart of the world's power and progress. Ava had seen grandeur before. The capital of Ash had its imposing walls, its towering keeps, its ancient fortifications built on the backs of generations of conquest. But this, Pict, was something entirely different. The gate creaked open, the enchantments humming softly, and the moment the caravan passed through, she was swallowed whole by the sheer immensity of it all. The streets stretched wide, paved in smooth black stone that shimmered faintly with embedded runes of guidance. Streams of carriages, beasts, and even a few floating transports weaved through the ordered chaos of the thoroughfares. Overhead, great bridges and skywalks laced between towering structures of steel and mana-infused stone, their surfaces etched with radiant sigils that flickered in hues of blue and gold. The city was layered, a ladder of wealth and privilege made manifest in brick and magic. The lower levels bustled with vendors, market stalls, and commoners pushing through their daily routines, the scent of sizzling meats and exotic spices wafting through the air. The second tier held grander establishments, merchant houses, alchemical labs, and adventurer guild halls, their facades polished and adorned with banners of family crests and sigils of trade. But higher still, stretching into the clouds, were the spiraling spires and estates of the true elite. Floating gardens suspended by intricate gravimetric spells hung between the towers, their lush greenery a stark contrast to the cold steel and glass. As Ava walked through the city, she could feel the mana density thickening with each step upward. It clung to the air like mist, seeping into her lungs, making her breath come easier, her thoughts sharper. The Nexus weave coursed through the city like arteries, its glowing veins of power converging at the highest spires. The realization was stark: the higher one climbed, the denser the mana became. Those who lived in the towering heights of Pict were not just wealthier in coin, but in raw magical potential. It was a city built on power, both seen and unseen, and those who controlled the heights ruled it in more ways than one. Ava inhaled sharply, tilting her head upward. Somewhere within that glittering skyline was her future. The World College of War. It was not a path granted to someone like her, a fisher's daughter, an orphan of the sea, scraping by on ambition and the power she'd wrested from herself through sheer force of will. Yet here she was, and she intended to climb this city like a fortress wall. One rung at a time. She adjusted the straps of the pack slung over her shoulder, stepping lightly off the caravan. Her boots met the pavement, and with that one step, she left behind the girl who had grown up in the shadow of Ash's volcanic towers. Now, she was a student of war. A contender in the world's grandest stage of power. The city swallowed her whole as she pressed forward, moving through the ebb and flow of its denizens. She had studied the maps, memorized the path from the gates to the college grounds. No hesitation, no faltering. She would walk these streets with the confidence of someone who belonged. And yet, amidst the cascading sea of people, amidst the vibrant clash of voices and cultures, a flicker of familiarity caught her eye. A figure, poised and elegant, draped in the signature dark blue and silver of nobility. Hair as pale as moonlight, a sharp gaze scanning the crowd before locking onto Ava with a flicker of surprise. A moment later, a knowing smirk curled across the noblewoman's lips, and she lifted a hand in an effortless wave. Morgana Ash. Ava hesitated for the briefest of moments before stepping forward, weaving through the passing bodies until she stood face to face with the scion of House Ash. They had never been particularly close, separated by years and vastly different upbringings. Morgana had graduated 2 years ahead of her, already entrenched in the higher echelons of society by birthright alone. Yet they had shared one peculiar connection: Wolfhart. Morgana's gaze swept over her appraisingly before she inclined her head. Well, if it isn't Ava Valda Ashdock, all grown up and stepping into the grand stage. Ava folded her arms, lifting an eyebrow. And here I thought you'd be off leading raiding parties into the unknown. Morgana chuckled, a rich, knowing sound. Not quite yet. There's always more to learn. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with something unreadable. I assume you're here for the College of War? Ava nodded. Got the offer, and I wasn't about to pass it up. Morgana's smile widened, something almost predatory lurking beneath her amusement. Good. Then we'll be seeing quite a bit of each other. I'll be attending as well. Ava blinked, surprised despite herself. Didn't expect that. Oh, trust me, Morgana said lightly, stepping beside her, neither did half of my family. But as you and I both know, some paths require forging, not following. They fell into step together, the towering spires of the college now fully visible in the distance. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt something close to camaraderie. She had fought alone for so long, always pushing forward without anyone truly beside her. But here, in this impossible city, in this impossible opportunity, she was not alone. The climb had begun, and she was not the only one reaching for the top. The War College of Pict was everything Ava had hoped for and more. From the moment she stepped through its towering gates, she realized this was not just another academic institution, it was a proving ground for the best, a sanctuary for those who sought to push themselves beyond conventional limits. The philosophy of the college was simple: self-determination. There were no compulsory classes, no rigid tests or examinations. Instead, the only standard was one's own ambition. Those who thrived here did so through sheer willpower, honing their craft in real battle, taking on real missions beyond the safety of the city's walls. It was a school in name only. At its core, it was a crucible where humanity's finest warriors were forged. Ava had been skeptical at first, expecting there to be some catch. But the reality was even more liberating than she had dared to dream. She had been assigned her own personal research lounge, an expansive, well-stocked study filled with magical texts, experimental tomes, and even a dedicated workspace to refine her control over her Nova magic. It was everything she had lacked at the Academy of Ash: resources, privacy, and most importantly, absolute freedom. For the first time in her life, Ava felt like she had control over her own future, and she intended to seize every opportunity the college offered. What surprised her even more was how quickly she found herself growing close to Morgana Ashe. They had never been close at the academy, their paths diverging due to age and station, but in Pict, everything was different. Morgana was no longer just a noble of the Ashe Kingdom, bound by familial expectations. She was a fellow student, another ambitious fighter looking to carve her name into history. Their shared experiences, their mutual drive for power and recognition, created a bond neither of them had expected. The two spent their days exploring the marvels of Pict, indulging in the city's endless opportunities for entertainment and adventure. One evening, they dined at a floating restaurant suspended between two of the city's titanic spires, watching the golden blue of the Nexus weave pulsed above them like celestial rivers of magic. Another afternoon was spent in the underground dueling pits, where they tested their skills against lesser challengers, taking bets on how many seconds it would take for one of them to claim victory. Morgana had a sharp wit and a taste for expensive liquor, while Ava preferred strong coffee and late-night debates on the finer points of battlefield magic. The contrast only deepened their friendship. They laughed together, sparred together, and plotted together, each knowing that the other would be among the few who truly understood what it meant to claw one's way to the top. When Ava brought up her desire to take on real missions outside the city walls, it was Morgana who immediately suggested she join her raiding team. It was a natural progression, an extension of the camaraderie they had built. Morgana's brother, Stefan, led an elite group of noble raiders, carefully selecting only the most promising candidates. When he heard that Ava was interested, he agreed without hesitation. "She's the only solo graduate from Ashe in history," Morgana had told him with a smirk. "You'd be an idiot not to take her." And so, Ava found herself thrust into the world of real combat, ready to experience firsthand the thrill of battle beyond the safety of enchanted arenas and training grounds. This was what she had been preparing for all these years. She had spent countless nights in the Academy's library, reading about combat methodologies, mana manipulation, and advancement techniques. Every book had agreed on one thing: real battle experience was irreplaceable. The way mana reacted in the chaos of combat, the way instincts sharpened under pressure, the way a fighter grew when faced with true life or death stakes, none of it could be replicated in a classroom. Her first raid was fast approaching, and Ava had never felt more alive. The doors of the War College had flung open a world of possibilities, and she would take full advantage of every single one of them. This was just the beginning.